Hey everyone, welcome back to K-Korner, the channel where we dive into the wild world of entitled people and their unbelievable stories. Hope you enjoy it, and without further ado, let's go. Our neighbor is downright crazy. We have lived in our apartment for 4 years and we love it. However, the past year has been terrible. We got a new neighbor, not in our own hallway but in the adjoining building hallway. She shares a wall with us. The first few weeks were fine. We talked with her and told her that if there were ever any issues, we were open to communication. We have never had any issues before, but since we have a dog, although quite small, we like to be upfront with all our neighbors to have a healthy relationship with the people around us. After the first few weeks, the problems started occurring. Suddenly, we got complaints about our dog barking. Not just one complaint, but 3 to 4 in a week. Our dog is the most gentle old soul there is, and he only barks on 3 occasions. When the doorbell rings, and he is happy to see you. When he gets spooked by something, which is rare, and when we play, which we only do for 5 to 10 minutes at a time because we know the sound can be annoying. He never barks when he is home alone or otherwise. He is very chill and mellow. He has made friends with everyone in our hallway, and several of them have been dog-sitting if we had to leave for longer periods. They all say he is the easiest dog to look after. Anyway, we talked to the superintendent, who was not allowed to elaborate on who the complaints were coming from, as they were reported anonymously, but we soon found out. The neighbor, who I will call Karen from now on, started banging on the walls whenever she felt we were too loud. One weekend at around 10:30 a.m., we had been playing with our dog for maybe 5 minutes when she aggressively banged on our wall. Mind you, we live in a concrete building with 30 centimeters thick walls. I talked to everyone else in our hallway, but no one was bothered by our dog. We live in a building with several other dogs, and in the surrounding buildings there are dogs as well. Dogs who bark. We tried to keep it down, and for a while we thought that was the end of it. Recently, Karen started complaining again, not just to the landlord and superintendent, but also in our Facebook group, designated for our area. While we were away on holiday, out of the country, Karen decided it was time to do a long rant in the Facebook group, telling everyone how horrible we are at keeping our dog quiet, and that we make him bark just to annoy her. She even stooped so low as to comment on our private life, writing about how loud we are, and that I, female, have loud fake reactions. Yes, our superintendent saw it and has screenshots as proof, because, of course, she edited it later when we returned home. I feel trapped in my own home, being afraid to do anything that might set her off and give us another complaint. Luckily, the superintendent is on our side. He and other neighbors have told us that we are not the only ones she has complained about. She has also complained about a newborn with colic who was crying, a developmentally disabled child who cannot talk and therefore makes noises instead, someone talking on their own balcony. Karen told the person to respect her privacy and that she did not want to hear what they were talking about. They are 3 apartments apart. An elderly man living underneath her apartment who needed help. She complained that his helpers were making too much noise when they visited. And then, of course, us. Honestly, we all dislike her. This is going to be long but full of entitlement. I was in the hospital and ended up being put in the observation unit because no specialist beds were available. The observation unit is a catch-all ward where patients are placed if they're not in imminent danger but need regular monitoring. It's bright and extremely noisy, so nobody can sleep well. Unfortunately, Biscuit Karen arrives at 10 p.m. on the first day. Why is she called Biscuit Karen? Because she wants a biscuit and she's shouting loudly enough for the whole unit to hear. Never mind the time or that we're mostly trying to sleep. Never mind that her blood sugar is 8.5 elevated, and she's diabetic, so she really doesn't need more sugar. However, the long-suffering nurses find her a biscuit and ask her to be quiet. Biscuit Karen does not quiet down because shouting is her default setting, and she doesn't seem to notice that other patients exist. After 10 minutes of solid noise pollution, she wants another biscuit. The nurses give it to her. More noise. Then, 15 minutes later, she shouts for another biscuit. The nurses are occupied, so nobody answers her immediately. So she shouts her request louder, as if we all hadn't heard her already. This is where the nurses begin to lose patience. She is told to be quiet, and her blood sugar level is mentioned. However, Biscuit Karen insists, so she's given another biscuit. Maybe the nurses drugged this one because Biscuit Karen soon goes to sleep, and snores loudly. This was a taste of what was to come, but nobody on the unit knew it yet. Day 2, 11 p.m. Biscuit Karen has been okay all day, and nothing much appears to be wrong with her. She has a walking aid and can get herself to the toilet. But she doesn't want to. She shouts for a nurse to put her on the commode. A very blunt nurse points out that she's seen Karen walking, so she's not going to help her. The toilet is only 10 meters away. Biscuit Karen does not accept this. She keeps shouting for a nurse to help her. Eventually, the blunt nurse goes to check, and Biscuit Karen has actually wet herself in her passive-aggressive rage. The nurse is shocked and tells Biscuit Karen off. Biscuit Karen does not care. Meanwhile, the bed is now sodden and the sheets have to be changed. The blunt nurse helps put Biscuit Karen on the commode and then goes to get the spare sheets. Unfortunately for the nurses, other patients are being equally tricky. There's the alcoholic man who can't walk but keeps trying and falling to the floor, the polar opposite of our anti-heroine. And a woman with a broken neck who constantly takes off her nightgown and tries to wander. All the nurses are kept busy rounding up the strays, and inevitably forget about the abandoned Biscuit Karen left sitting on the commode. Biscuit Karen ensures that she's not neglected for long. "Can somebody help me?" ricochets repeatedly around the unit, to the dismay of all the people trying to sleep. Eventually, it becomes, "Somebody help me. My back hurts." Of all the disruptive behavior happening in the unit, she's by far the loudest, most persistent, and most obnoxious because she caused her own discomfort in the first place. I'm peeved, and so is everyone else. The blunt nurse gets back to her, and an argument starts. She's cross as she's needlessly making the bed. Biscuit Karen is angry that she's been left in an uncomfortable sitting position. In fact, she's getting more aggressive by the second, and eventually she slaps the nurse. The blunt nurse doesn't put up with this nonsense. She abandons making the bed, leaves Biscuit Karen on timeout, still on the commode, and ignores all shouted demands to come back. She tells the other irate patients that she's not risking further aggression, and we all agree with her in solidarity. The blunt nurse was true to her word, so eventually, the deeply compassionate nurse tried her luck making the bed. Unfortunately for the compassionate nurse, Biscuit Karen is a raging racist, true to stereotype, and she not only calls her a derogatory term, but also tells her to go back to where she came from. The compassionate nurse nopes out at that point, while the blunt nurse calls security. Biscuit Karen has begun yelling every few seconds, "I want my phone, where is my phone?" still from the commode, presumably so she can enact her threats. "I'm going to report you, I'm going to get you fired." The nurses aren't foolish, so nobody gives Biscuit Karen her phone. It doesn't occur to Biscuit Karen to get off the commode and find her own phone. Meanwhile, the other patients have hit their limit and have started yelling at Biscuit Karen to be quiet. It's past 12 a.m., and nobody can go to sleep yet. At this point, the cries from Biscuit Karen change to "somebody help me" every 3 seconds over and over again. The nurses are unmoved. There is a torrent of reactive verbal abuse from the other patients, but Biscuit Karen doesn't seem to hear them. In fact, she has completely devolved into a pathetic toddler tantrum, except toddlers have more self-respect, and she stays immersed in her self-pity for a long time. Meanwhile, 1 a.m. rolls around. Security officers take their time to arrive, but when they do, they are met with what appears to be a distressed old lady who claims that the nurses are hurting her and that the compassionate nurse actually hit her, an audacious lie. However, Biscuit Karen is too dysregulated to keep the facade up for long and morphs back into a spiteful and aggressive harpy when the blunt nurse goes back to fix the bed. The security officers see exactly why they were called and try to keep the peace while the bed is finally finished. There's not much two thick-set men can do with a small old woman perched on a commode, but they try. Eventually, Biscuit Karen starts demanding her medication, and somebody comes up with the bright idea of calling an accident and emergency doctor. Who can quell the entitled savagery of the enraged Karen? Of course, it would be a young, handsome, confident male doctor, the very epitome of a rescuer to an old woman trying to play the victim. When he turns up, Biscuit Karen becomes a sweet and compliant old lady answering, "Yes, doctor, no, doctor." She does try to repeat her lie about being assaulted, but several patient statements, 2 jaded nurses, and 2 exiting security personnel prove otherwise. The doctor gives Biscuit Karen her meds, she is helped to bed, and she falls asleep. Meanwhile, the rest of the patients in the unit are too high on adrenaline to feel drowsy, so we are condemned to further wakefulness. I was glad to leave the next day. If you read this far, thank you, and I hope you enjoyed the sorry tale. This was a couple of years ago, but I can't get it out of my head, so I thought I'd share it here. Okay, to start with the story. My family lived across the country back then, so I would usually buy a flight to get there. Well, this was during the holidays, so everything was backed up and there were a lot of storms. When I got to my first layover, my flight was canceled, and they couldn't get into their system to get me a hotel. So I slept on the airport floor that night, clutching all my bags. By the time I got onto the plane, I had spent 24 hours in the airport. Luckily, for this flight, I had booked first class. So I got on the plane and got comfortable. I was just so happy that I'd be home soon after the last couple of days I had. Then, a really nice flight attendant came over and pointed at the empty seat next to me and mine. She told me a mother forgot to book her toddler's ticket and wondered if they could take my seat and the empty seat next to me. I told her that I was sorry, but I'd had a really long day and paid extra for this, so I would like to stay. The flight attendant was very nice and said no problem, but she let the woman come sit in the empty seat next to me with her toddler on her lap. The woman immediately looked at me with a scowl and said, "I can't believe you wouldn't trade your seat for a kid." I simply told her, "Ma'am, I paid extra for this seat. You should have booked him a ticket. This isn't my fault." She kept saying things under her breath and to her toddler like I couldn't hear her. Then she told her kid to make the most noise he can do whatever he wants. She kept saying things to me, and I couldn't believe this entitled woman. I finally lashed out and said, "Will you shut the heck up?" I'm not proud of myself for this. But with the last couple of days I had, I didn't care anymore. My common sense came back, and I apologized for swearing in front of her kid, even though I heard her call me a jerk and many other words. Again, the woman wouldn't shut up. Finally, my savior came. That really nice flight attendant. She came over, bent down to the woman's level, and said, "Ma'am, you were lucky to be able to switch seats. All I've heard from you since you switched is you threatening this woman and telling your child to be noisy. This plane hasn't left yet, and we have no problem kicking you off this flight. If you continue to do this while we're in the air, you will be banned." I couldn't help but smile. She finally shut up, and I was so glad that I had downloaded Sex Life on Netflix so I could finish my steamy show right in front of her. Edit. For people asking, I'm assuming the child was under the age of 2, just a big baby. If your child is under 2, you can fly with them on your lap instead of buying them a seat ticket. I'm assuming this is what the woman did and was hoping she'd get an extra seat. I hope that clears some things up. Sorry. Edit 2. For those asking, I'm guessing most people on the plane came from canceled flights as well. The plane was smaller than the last plane I was originally supposed to go on. I don't know if that was the reason she needed a seat for her kid or not. I don't know why they didn't just switch the grandmother to first class, but I'm guessing the flight attendant asked if one of them wanted to switch, and the mom was the one who took the opportunity. Again, I don't know if this was the thought process, but it makes the most sense to me. So picture this. It's a muggy summer evening, sweat trickling down my back, and my grandpa, a sprightly old fella who's seen more sunsets than I've seen Marvel movies, decides he's in desperate need of a cold one. Now, Grandpa isn't your typical bingo and early bird special kind of senior. Nope, he's more of a wisecracking life of the party aging rebel kind of guy. So there we are, Me and Grandpa cruising down the dusty roads of our little town in his vintage Chevy. We roll up to this sketchy-looking joint that's more rust than neon, but Grandpa insists they have the coldest beer in town. As we saunter in, the door creaks like it's straight out of some old horror movie. I mean, really, it needs some WD-40 or a swift kick in the hinges. The place is dimly lit, a jukebox in the corner blasting some forgotten 80s tune, and a motley crew of regulars huddled around the bar. Now, let me tell you about Grandpa. He's not one to be messed with. Silver hair, a face lined with tales from yesteryear, and a poker face that could rival a seasoned gambler. The dude's got charisma, even if he's a bit rough around the edges. So Grandpa sidles up to the bar, leans on it like he's James Dean, and orders 2 cold ones. The bartender, a middle-aged lady with a haircut that screams 80s rebellion, glares at us. Let's call her Betty. Betty eyes us up and down like we're intruders in her secret lair. Now, you'd think getting a couple of beers would be the simplest thing in the world, right? Not in this joint. Betty, with a snarky grin, slams the beers down and says, "Cash only, boys." We're cool with that, but Grandpa, being the witty gentleman he is, decides to strike up a conversation. "Nice place you got here, Betty." "Seen better days, but hey, so have I. Smooth, right?" Betty doesn't seem to appreciate the charm offensive. She shoots back with, "Look, old man, just pay for your beers and leave. I've got a business to run." Grandpa, never one to back down, gives her a sly smile and says, "You know, back in my day we respected our elders. We also didn't sell beer to kids. Times have changed, huh? Now, this is where it gets interesting." A couple of kids, probably fresh out of high school, strut into the joint like they own the place. They head straight for the bar, and Betty, without batting an eyelid, hands them a 6-pack of beer. Grandpa, ever the eagle-eyed old man, notices something fishy. He leans over and says, "Hey Betty, those kids legal?" Betty smirks. "Not your business, old man, just drink your beer and leave." But Grandpa, he's not having any of it. He calls over the kids and, in the smoothest Grandpa move ever, asks for their ids. Lo and behold, these kids are barely old enough to drive, let alone drink. Grandpa, now in full-on hero mode, turns to Betty and says, "You're in deep trouble, lady." Betty, realizing her little scheme is unraveling, panics. She stammers, "Look, it's none of your business. Mind your own business, Grandpa." But Grandpa isn't about to let this slide. He pulls out his phone, dials 911, and reports the whole shebang. As he's talking to the dispatcher, Betty is sweating bullets, and the kids are nervously shifting from foot to foot. Within minutes, the cops roll up like they're in an episode of Cops. Grandpa, with a triumphant grin, points at Betty and says, "She's selling booze to minors, officers." The cops, all business, start checking ids, and, sure enough, the kids are underage. Betty, realizing she's caught red-handed, starts babbling excuses like a teenager caught sneaking out past curfew. The cops cuff her, the kids get a stern talking to, and Grandpa, well, he's soaking up the glory. As they lead Betty out, she shoots Grandpa a look that could curdle milk. Grandpa, being the legend he is, just tips his imaginary hat and says, "Maybe next time, Betty." The news of Betty's little operation spreads like wildfire in our small town. The joint gets shut down, and Grandpa becomes the local hero. It turns out this wasn't Betty's first rodeo. She'd been playing fast and loose with the law for years. And just like that, a shady beer-selling business crumbled because Grandpa, with his sharp eyes and quick thinking, decided to play detective in the dimly lit den of debauchery. The town was safer for it, and Grandpa, well, he earned himself a reputation as the wise old sheriff who wasn't afraid to stand up to the likes of Betty. Enjoying the stories yet? If you do, please subscribe, like, and comment. Hello, my friends and I had been talking about Karens after watching the Karen movie. We had rented it because our parents weren't comfortable with us going to movie theaters during the pandemic. A friend of mine, whom I've known since first grade, reminded me of the children destroyer Karen. She was a woman we hoped never to see again. A friend of mine watching was intrigued, as she had moved into the state after the Karen was gone when we were in 7th grade. I told her about it, and now I'm telling you. The 6th grade school year had begun for me. A few months later, a woman moved in with her 2 entitled kids in my grade. The woman, who I'll call entitled mother, had a daughter and a son, with the signature Karen haircut. I didn't know what it was at the time. I thought she was just a normal woman. My opinion changed when the school year began. I walked to school with my amazing cousin, who was in 8th grade at the time. We lived on the same block, and you'll soon find out why she's so amazing. While crossing the street, we heard a horn. We looked over and saw entitled mother blasting her car's horn, yelling at the couple of kids crossing the street, including us. Cousin, isn't that entitled mother? Me, yeah. Cousin soon noticed something in entitled mother's car. A tall, halfway empty bottle of vodka. She recognized it because that was one of her mother's favorite drinks. She instantly started to run across the street, hurrying me along just in case entitled mother was drunk. Me, what's going on, cousin? Entitled mother has a large bottle of vodka in her passenger seat. I want to make sure you're safe. I don't care for those kids. They cause enough trouble. She was talking about entitled daughter and entitled son. She lived next to them, so she knew what they were really like. She and her parents didn't tell me because they didn't want to get me, as young as I was at the time, involved in such a situation. Darn, I knew she was a Karen. That was the first time I heard the name Karen used to describe a group of people. Unluckily, entitled daughter was in the same homeroom as me. She was a total bully. Regarding the boys' classes, entitled son was as bad as her, maybe even worse, as he tended to throw paper balls at teachers and students. In my middle school, there were separate homerooms for boys and girls, including one that was mixed. I became a huge target of their bullying, leading to self-esteem issues and depression at a young age. I blamed myself, as they targeted me due to my symptoms of attention deficit hyperactivity disorder, my stuttering, and the issues resulting from their bullying. I hadn't told cousin or anyone about it, but she ended up finding out anyway. I was walking with my books when entitled son pushed me, making me drop my stuff. Cousin saw from the corner of her eye and marched towards me. I was on the floor crying, unable to take it anymore. She patted my shoulder and gave me a hug, then got up and walked after entitled son and entitled daughter, grabbing them by the collar and dragging them toward the office. There were cameras in the hall that they hadn't noticed when they pushed me. After seeing the footage and ensuring cousin didn't hurt those brats, they received a punishment equivalent to a slap on the wrist. A 30-minute detention. Cousin, however, received a 2-day suspension because entitled son and entitled daughter claimed she had hurt them on the way there. Since they were the good kids, near the teachers, sadly, the bullying continued and got worse. One day in the 6th grade, teachers had a meeting. These meetings lasted the whole week, so there were a bunch of substitutes. Entitled daughter and entitled son treated the substitutes with no respect, bringing their reputations down with the whole school staff. They were no longer believed and were monitored closely, resulting in multiple suspensions. That's when entitled mother's full Karen-ness set sail. She started to deliberately harass children and seemed to be looking for me. I walked with cousin, but that Karen would just stick up her middle finger when cousin wasn't looking. I held back tears. One day, we were very early, and with horrible coincidence, entitled mother and her brats were too. Cousin had gotten thirsty, so she went to a park popular and near the middle school. It had water fountains with clean water. She told me to stay there, so I sat down and then I heard the signature. Excuse me. I looked up, and to my horror, entitled mother, entitled daughter, and entitled son were there. Entitled mother, I hear that you and your cousin have been causing my children some trouble. I'll get your parents and that cousin of yours arrested and you'll have no one. It was something like that. Entitled mother continued to berate me when cousin came by right behind her and her children. Cousin was tall, about 5 feet 10 inches at that age, while Karen was about 5 feet 2 inches. Her brats seemed to have gotten their height from their father, as they were a bit taller than their mother. Cousin, hey, entitled mother and her brats looked at cousin horrified. She was back, and she looked angry. What had been happening to me caused her to have an extremely low tolerance for Karens. Cousin, you see Karen, this is why your husband left you. He was probably tired of your nonsense. How are you going to berate a child and encourage your kids to help you? That's why they've been getting in trouble. You're such a Karen, and nothing will ever help that. Entitled mother started to talk back, but suddenly cousin got closer, cracking her knuckles, and entitled mother ran off, dragging her children behind her. Over the next few months, entitled mother's demon spawns left me alone. As far as I knew, they had found new targets. One of the targets wasn't having it. They told their parents. One day, as cousin and I were walking, we saw a woman about the same height as entitled mother, and one of the targets walking up to the car window. They started an argument, and entitled mother ended up punching the kid, breaking his nose. Police had been nearby and saw the whole debacle. Entitled mother was arrested, and the woman requested to press charges. To the people here who kept telling me not to divorce, that my wife loved me, etc., you couldn't have been more wrong. I couldn't even tell who amongst you were trolls or just naive fools. Some even brought religion into it. I couldn't care less about someone's religious views on divorce. They are not me. They are not living my life. I remember an old example of a rich man saying he knows how hard it is to pay for gas when he drives $1 million car. He can't know the struggle of paying for gas when he has enough wealth to buy an obscenely expensive automobile. In the same way, someone can't claim to know whether or not my soon-to-be ex-wife loved me just because. They didn't live with her or her mother. They did not suffer at their hands. So they don't have valid reasons to say they knew better. I also apologize for the length of this post, but there's a lot to say. Edit. Just wanted to make sure everyone reading knows this all happened months ago. I took a break from Reddit for some time. My soon-to-be ex-wife pretty much admitted to my face that she only married me for financial security. So yeah, I was exactly right. She spent years grooming me so she could trap me in marriage and walk all over me. And yes, she did have plans to trap me with a baby as well after I initiated divorce. I've confirmed this, but she dropped any act of wanting to save the marriage after her mother died. In my last post, I told how I reported my mother-in-law's hoarding, and her house was inspected and scheduled to be condemned. She demanded my soon-to-be ex-wife pay for the house to be fixed. But when my soon-to-be ex-wife said she couldn't pay, her mother went wild on her, and then died from a heart attack soon after. She had a congenital heart condition I was completely unaware of until after she had passed away. I was told for years she was on disability only for mental problems. But she actually had a weak heart. Her potentially being removed from the only home she'd lived in for decades put her stress over the edge, and her heart gave out when she attacked her own daughter for being unable to fund her home restoration. Yes, I do still feel guilty about what happened, but it's in the past now. My mother-in-law's house was torn down, not sure when. But about a week before making my previous post, I drove over to where her house was, and there's nothing but an empty lot now. The house was likely declared a biohazard or something. Not sure if my soon-to-be ex-wife owns the property now or if it was sold. I don't know. I can't imagine my soon-to-be ex-wife inherited much of anything good from her mother's hoarder den. That house was so bad, I'd even seen a rat scurry by across the top of the hoard once. Many past commenters were exactly right about my soon-to-be ex-wife likely aiming at trying to trap me with a baby with her love-bombing behavior. A few days after she'd left to the motel when her mother died, I went into the bathroom she tore up to clean it. She'd left it in quite a state the day she left by having a meltdown in there. But thankfully, nothing but her personal items were broken. She did splatter shampoo all over the walls though. While cleaning, I looked in the wastebasket and noticed a bottle of pills with fertility support written on the label. When I removed the cap from the bottle, the paper seal had been torn out. I googled this stuff, and it was a common female fertility vitamin that anyone could buy online or in-store. Not prescription. I confronted my soon-to-be ex-wife when she came to get some more of her stuff. She admitted that she'd hoped to get pregnant so I wouldn't divorce her. But that was before her mother died. After that, she said she'd never want to touch me again. And she scoffed when I said I'd felt that way towards her for a while before she did. I never found out if my ex put anything in the food or open beer she'd tried to serve me though. I searched the house top to bottom for anything else that might have been a clue and came up with nothing. So she may have just wanted to get me drunk. I can't express enough though how glad I am that I didn't have a child with this woman. I wasn't allowed to attend my mother-in-law's funeral. Though I didn't really want to go, my soon-to-be ex-wife specifically told me she didn't want me there, and I responded that I understood why. But then later, my soon-to-be ex-wife posted online that she was furious barely anyone from her family showed up, not even her father came, and then she lied by saying I was invited but refused to come, which was blatantly false, and I had screenshots of our texts proving it. When my soon-to-be ex-wife left the house after her mother died, she went back to the motel for an extended stay while she moved her stuff out bit by bit, either to storage or a friend's place. I don't know since I didn't help. I heard from friends she eventually found a studio apartment, but hated living in such a small space after previously having a house. She was also seen looking miserable at the local laundromat. Our former landlord agreed to keep the extra furniture neither of us could take, as his new incoming renters were happy to use them. A lot of you thought she would. But my soon-to-be ex-wife did not try to sabotage the house in any way other than her bathroom tantrum. But she stubbornly refused to help pay for a cleaning service. She made it more than obvious she was doing that to spite me. So rather than wasting time fighting with her about it, I hired a cleaning crew myself. They and I left that house spotless, and I got back my half of the security deposit without issue. I did later buy a used Kent Ridgeland bike and started riding again. The bike had a replacement seat but is otherwise bone stock original. I only ride a little at a time these days, currently once or twice a week at most. I just don't have the passion for it I used to, but I do enjoy my short cruises around town, and while I could commute to work on the bike, the surprising amount of warnings I got from people here telling me that's a bad idea made me reconsider doing it. It didn't help that I found out that some friend of a friend got hit by a car while on his bike a couple of months ago. So I'm just hobby riding instead of commuting. My best friend joins me sometimes too. He's got a red Mongoose mountain bike he dusted off. It needed tires, so I put some on for him and gave the bike a tune-up, and then we took to the bike paths. His bike has gears but is also much heavier. Mine's a single speed but fairly nimble, so it kind of evens out. After her mother's funeral, my soon-to-be ex-wife went into full hate mode. She started bad-mouthing me on her social media and told multiple lies about me because she saw me as responsible for what happened to her mother. She claimed I was physically, emotionally, and financially abusive, which I was not. If anything, she was all that to me. She also played off the value of my skeleton key collection, which she still claimed was worthless. However, there was already a fair amount of word spread around through my friends and former mutual friends about what really happened, and they commented on her posts about it to the point she took them down. But I still got messages from angry flying monkeys. The most common thing they said was that I ended a sick old woman's life over keys. I told them all my side of what happened and pointed out I had plenty of evidence, including being told I wasn't invited to the funeral and showing screenshots of the texts. I was sorry my mother-in-law died, but I couldn't have foreseen she'd have a heart attack, and her house was so bad it was completely unlivable. A select few apologized, most just stopped talking, and a good few persistently called me a liar. So I had to block them. I ended up contacting my soon-to-be ex-wife to tell her that I'd file a defamation lawsuit on top of the divorce if she didn't stop making posts about me, which likely wouldn't bode well for her career. I'd already screenshotted everything I needed from her profile before she deleted the posts. Well, she tried to say I was blackmailing her, but she stopped. Then she played the whole situation off as just being angry in the moment. But her lying was still called out, and she lost all her credibility. She soon shut down her social media entirely, and called me afterward to blame me for it. Then she mocked me and said she was glad I was divorcing her. She told me I'd never satisfied her in bed because I was too vanilla, and she wished she could have gone back to her ex-boyfriend. That one actually stung a bit. To clarify though, my soon-to-be ex-wife never cheated on me. Many people figured she did, including my friends, but no, she just spent a lot of time with her mother. I've also spoken to the man who dated her before me. Some of my soon-to-be ex-wife's former friends were still in touch with him and gave me his number. He told me he dumped her because she and her mother treated him the same way they treated me after I married my soon-to-be ex-wife, which means their playing nice for 3 years was one calculated move. I also learned from the guy that he'd found out the guy who dated my soon-to-be ex-wife before him also dumped her for the same reasons, and he was her high school sweetheart. I'm afraid there's still more to this and we'll make another post soon. I will say though, that the divorce is underway and not going in my soon-to-be ex-wife's favor. Background context. I'm a 65-year-old white male with a full white beard and a well-earned beer gut. At the time of this story, just after Thanksgiving, I was shopping at a fairly nice mall-anchoring department store. To be fair to the woman in the story, I was wearing a bright red hoodie, but with old, nicely broken-in jeans and gray Merrell hiking boots, I looked nothing like the business casual attire of the store employees. I was also nowhere near a full Santa suit. I know, I've got one. The story. I was browsing the kids' clothing trying to find something cute for one of my granddaughters. She likes shirt dresses, long shorts, and unicorns. I had a couple of her size t-shirts with the mythical creatures pictured on them in my cart, and was seeking shorts to go with them, when I heard a loud "excuse me" from somewhere behind me. Naturally, I ignored it, though I said a quick prayer for whatever luckless individual it was actually directed at. Silly me. The next thing to break my shopping focus was a painfully forceful 3-fingered blow to my shoulder, hard enough to make me take an extra half step for balance. No mean feat, since I'm 6 feet 250-ish pounds. My fight-or-flight reflex opted for fight, since I'm a mildly post-traumatic stress disorder veteran with a .44 Bulldog revolver on my hip. Yes, I have a permit, and no, this store does not forbid legally carried weapons. I whipped around to face my assailant, stepping back to open up space, my right hand instinctively going to my holster, more to ensure no one was grabbing for my pistol than any thought of pulling it. My left coming up with fist clenched. Apparently, this startled a squawk from the woman, a 30 to 40-year-old, with an elementary-age-looking child in tow. She took a half step back, and I relaxed a bit. We eyed each other for a half-second or so in silence. I recovered first. "What is wrong with you? Why did you hit me?" I bellowed. She was very contrite, mumbling an apology and fleeing. "Just kidding," with typical stubbornness she screeched. "I did no such thing, and if you weren't ignoring customers, I wouldn't have had to, me. I don't woe her. Now take me to your village or whatever. My niece wants her picture with you." "What?" I actually said that. I think my brain locked for a second, trying to make sense of this nonsensical topic shift. Her. "You know where you take pictures of kids, me." "Lady, I'm not a photographer." Total confusion now. I mean, I'm thinking, did I have a stroke, or is she having one? Her. "Of course not. The kids sit on you and get their picture taken. What kind of Santa are you, me?" Brain gears finally meshing, remembering the color of my sweatshirt. "Ma'am, I'm not Santa. I'm a shopper just like you." Her. Puzzlement finally replacing entitled wrath on her face. Well, then you shouldn't dress like one. You're just a tease," me, shaking my head. "So I shouldn't wear jeans." At that I started to hear laughter, the kind of suppressed snort that escapes from someone who can't keep their glee inside anymore. I turned and saw a couple of employees and a few customers I hadn't noticed before, with various expressions ranging from mouth-covered snickering to red-faced, cheek-puffed grins. So did she, who stalked away without another word. Hardly my best comeback, but at least it pleased the peanut gallery. I simply bowed and went back to shopping. Thanks for joining us. If you enjoyed the video, don't forget to hit the like button and subscribe for more captivating stories. Share your own experiences and opinions in the comments below, and let's keep the conversation going. Until next time, stay tuned for more epic tales.